Gender studies are flat earth departments. They promote flat earth, they are based in flat earth. It's the same thing, it's flat earthism, because they base everything that they do in the denial of biology. There is no way that they can do anything beneficial. You cannot understand anything in society if you don't start at the beginning, meaning that we are a sexually reproductive species, that there is male and females, and the strategies of what is optimal for survival and reproduction, in particular for males and females, is entirely different.
Hello, my name is John O'Brien. Welcome to another episode of Deep Dives. On the program today, I'm going to talk to Leonardo Orlando about his new book that he wrote with Peggy Sester, Sex, Science and Censure. Welcome, Leonardo.
Thank you very much for having me, John.
For listeners unfamiliar with your work, what motivated you to write Sex, Science and Censure? And what do you think is the single most misunderstood aspect of your argument?
Well, I do believe that the key issue with all these topics about what we call gender, that is, in my view, a word that we should just drop and just talk about sex, is that people believe that evolution by natural selection has shaped over millions of years our body, but that it stopped at the shoulders and that it didn't shape our minds. Of course, that's a misunderstanding. And personally, what has motivated me to write this book is that I did the terrible mistake of having spent most, if not all, of my adult life in academia. And in the social sciences, there is a complete misunderstanding of human beings, something that is pretty serious for a whole set of disciplines that pretend to understand human behavior. And the key error that social sciences do is that they do not consider how evolution has shaped our minds. And actually, the gender topics, if you ask me, because usually it's like, well, why are you so passionate about gender? I am not. Actually, it kind of bores me, the gender issue. But the reason why we wrote this book and what I personally got so invested in is because you cannot understand anything in society if you don't start at the beginning, meaning that we are a sexually reproductive species, that there is male and females, and the strategies of what is optimal for survival and reproduction, in particular for males and females, it's entirely different. So there is no phenomenon in society that you cannot understand if you don't understand this very key core element.
Your book begins with several examples of cancelled events or courses. How representative do you think these episodes are? Are they isolated flashpoints or symptoms of a larger trend?
They are absolutely not isolated, not at all. And this has been quantified. There are studies, for example, when you check in the disciplines like anthropology, psychology, evolutionary biology, the core disciplines where you need to use evolutionary theory, nowadays the scientists working on this are more afraid of mobilizing evolutionary theory than they were 10 years ago. This is a huge study with over 500 scientists all over the world. 500 for regular studies, not much, but for over 500 scientists that were checked in the 2000 and then again 20 years later, that's a huge, important number. And this case is what is interesting is that it's everywhere in the world. You have exactly the same phenomena, not only in the US and in the Ivy League universities, but you have it also in Western Europe, you have it in Latin America. You can have exactly the same trends because the social sciences, what they have done is like as they have built all these businesses, and business not just in an economic way, but you know, this kind of things that work only by denying human nature. The only way that they have to exist now, to keep existing, is to ostracize, to put away and to silence the people that criticize them. So it's not isolated at all. I would even say that nowadays in academia, it's impossible to do actual science regarding these topics. And I know this seems maybe an exaggeration, but trust me, I am really measuring my words. And I do believe that you have nowadays actual scientists that they are confined to outside academia. for example, if you take biologist Colin Wright, biologist Carol Hooven, all these people that keep defending realities, that keep defending science, they have to do it outside of academia. While the people that, have all the tenure positions in the Ivy League universities, the ones that got there over the last 10, 20 years, they are all in the ideological spectrum. So what they do from their positions is to advance ideology, not science.
You argue that a vast amount of research supports innate behavioral differences between men and women. Could you describe the strongest, most robust area, most robust findings in this area?
Actually, I would say that it's every single one of the topics that we bring in the book. We have 20 chapters, each one of them dealing with a different aspect of our life, like what women want, what men want, jealousy, why it is different for men and women, dating apps, etc. And I could take several examples, but for example, what is interesting is that most of the things that we explain in the book are by themselves some of the most robust findings in the whole fields of psychology. For example, that women are more interested in beings and males are more interested in things. This is one of the most robust findings in the whole of psychology. The fact that women everywhere in the world, in absolutely every single culture, every country, everywhere, they pay a lot of attention and they value highly the status and the resources of a man as a potential partner. That's, once again, one of the most robust findings in psychology. So what is interesting about this, and this is the idea of the censorship word in our book. We don't really talk about censorship. As you mentioned, we mentioned that in the introduction, and that's all. There is literally only one phrase, I would say that maybe a few paragraphs at the very first page about these cases of censorship. Then what we do is we explain on this, and that's the censorship that all this overwhelmingly proven research is not taught in universities and is denied in the institutions, in the media. Here we are in Brussels, in the European Commission.
Conversely, what are the most legitimate scientific criticisms of evolutionary psychology or the biological approach that you think deserve attention?
I think that most of the critiques of evolutionary psychology that were legit have been completely overcome, because evolutionary psychology is kind of new as a field of itself. It comes from sociobiology that was created in the 70s, 80s, and then in the early 90s with people like Lida Cosmides, Sean Tooby, and others, that they have created evolutionary psychology that in itself it's just a mix between cognitive science and evolutionary biology. And I think that nobody is challenging the existence of cognitive science and evolutionary biology as true, solid, well-grounded scientific domains. So why we should not mix them to try to understand humans? So I do think that at the beginning there were some criticisms that it was interesting, of course, because it was a new field. So it's necessary to criticize it. And actually, if you go to any, there are just a few in the world, but if you go to the labs working on evolutionary psychology, like researchers, like challenging their research, all that, they're very critic. They may really sure that what they're advancing is entirely confirmed, it's entirely sure. So that in what is legit, let's say, that in my view has been solved. Then, of course, you have criticisms that it's not in good faith, that are just, strawman arguments, that I don't think that it deserves attention. But I do think that there are two things that they're not real criticisms, but misunderstandings. The first one is the biological reductionism, the idea that everything is being reduced to biology. And that's false, because evolutionary psychology, as all fields working on biology apply to humans, what they do is they consider the environment, but they also consider biology. And where does this misunderstanding comes, in my view, because the social sciences, as they don't consider biology at all, they only consider the environment, society, then they don't understand when there is a different approach, because they are like in a zero-sum game. And the other misunderstanding is regarding what is called the naturalistic sophism. It's like the fallacy, the naturalistic fallacy. It's like this idea that because you are saying that something is in nature, you meant that something it's good. And that, of course, it's completely false. Violence is in nature. It doesn't mean that it's good for us. Medicine is not in nature, and it's good for us. So when you are explaining what is in nature, what you're actually just doing is trying to understand something. You're not justifying that something.
Biology often explains tendencies or average differences. How do you ensure that these explanations aren't misinterpreted as deterministic or prescriptive?
Well, first of all, we're very clear about this in the book, and also every single author working on these issues, they make sure that people understand this. There is no determinism. Or what you have, it's like propensities, things like being genetic, etc. But then the environment plays a key role. So the thing is like. I always take the example, maybe because originally from Argentina, of Lionel Messi, right? So Lionel Messi, it's like if you don't have his genes, it doesn't matter how much do you play football, you are not going to become him. But even if you have his genes and you're never exposed to football, so you're never going to become him. So this is the interplay that you have for everything. So I do believe that that's one of the key issues here, to understand that there is the environment. The second thing that you mentioned regarding, these are statistical tendencies, is what we see statistically, and of course there is individual variation. Of course there is. Nobody's challenging that. But the misunderstanding here is that, for example, if I tell you men are taller than women, you say that's obvious, right? And you're not going to challenge that by saying, oh, my aunt is taller than my uncle, or all the girls in the Netherlands, they are taller than all the guys in Nepal. Of course, those things exist, but it doesn't jeopardize it. It doesn't check as you know, false the statistical reality that men are taller than women. The problem is when you start talking about things that people get triggered, like, for example, career interest. And there are reasons, biological, evolutionary reasons, why women prefer this type of careers and men prefer this type of careers. And of course, there are, once again, individual variations, but the general tendencies are clear.
Some cross-cultural research shows that sex differences widen in more gender egalitarian countries. How do you interpret this pattern, and what do you think it tells us about nature and culture?
This is one of the key examples of this is the so-called Scandinavian paradox. I think that I'm going to explain this, but just to begin with, what this tells us is the idea that society is all and that humans are only explained by society and by socialization. It's entirely false. What happens is, in which countries do you have more female engineers? If the socialization theory was right, in those countries where you have the most gender equality according to all international standards, you will have more female engineers. But it's quite the opposite. In the Scandinavian countries, you have more women that go into the classical women's fields, like veterinarian, medicine, psychology, social worker, etc. And you have more female engineers in countries like Iran or Morocco, that in gender standards, according to international measurements, it's not as Scandinavia, quite the opposite. So what you have there is that our natural tendencies can flourish when society and the state allows for that. The idea is that if the state warranties that you are not going to have to depend, if you're a woman, that you will not have to depend on a husband, for money. So if you're free to choose, you choose what you're naturally inclined to choose. for example, being a social worker or a veterinarian. While if you are constrained by social rules that make you dependent on a man, as for example in Iran, well, in that case, you're going to go maybe into a profession like engineering that is going to assure that you have some economic independence. So this is essentially the key. These cases show actually how nature is strong in us, how strong it works in us.
The book argues that biological perspectives are discouraged, censored in certain academic contexts. What evidence would convince you that the situation isn't as bad as you portray?
It's extremely easy. It's if we will see studies in the social sciences using this framework, but they don't. I mean, if you can check absolutely, just once again, we are in Brussels, so we have this research extravaganza of 95 billion euros called Horizon Europe, right? So you have thousands of research projects that are funded by 500,000, 1 million, 2 million, 4 million euros on different topics in the social sciences. Just let's check how many of those use this framework. And actually, it's quite the opposite. All of them that are working in topics related to what we are discussing, all of them, they are based in gender ideology, on feminist theory, in theories that are grounded in the denial of biology. Or just no research, teaching. If you go, for example, to Sciences Po, the institution where I did my PhD, that is supposed to be among the top 5 in the world for political science, the top 1 in continental Europe, the one where over 90% of the French top bureaucrats and, ministers and all that, they come from, according to numbers from the institution itself. You have literally over 80 courses on gender issues, some of them mandatory, and none of them using biology, all of them denying biology. So I will be delighted to see anywhere in the Western world nowadays where what we are saying doesn't apply. But unfortunately, is this terrible situation we are describing.
How do you differentiate between ideological censorship, institutional caution, and ordinary academic disagreement?
Well, that's a good question. The thing I will say that it all assumes something that has been very well studied. For example, Jonathan Haidt, the social psychologist, Ken Stanovich, the cognitive psychologist. Universities are monocultures. There is only one culture. There is no dissent. Universities, ideologically, both faculty and students, everywhere in the Western world, if you check, universities are 80-90% on the left. And for example, this number in the United States is if you include military universities, because if you take them out, military universities being the only ones a little bit on the right or mostly on the right, if you take them out, you have like 100% of both faculty and students that are on the left. So what you have is uniformity. There is no dissent. Everybody assumes that you think in the same way. This has created an atmosphere where people have no idea what it is to have different opinions. It's like, for people that are not familiar with this, it's very easy to explain the situation in university. The situation in university, every academic talk that you have with colleagues, with the students, etc., is the Jordan Peterson, Cathy Newman interview. I'm sure that, everybody's familiar with that. And essentially, Jordan Peterson, he was advancing some arguments. Cathy Newman, this journalist, who clearly had never in her life encountered these arguments, maybe in good faith, she was assuming all kind of crazy things about what Jordan Peterson was saying. It's like Jordan Peterson saying there are behavioral differences between men and women. No, what you mean is that women should be in the kitchen. This kind of meme, that's academia nowadays. It's impossible to present anything that goes against what they are saying. And this creates the thing where all the different things that you have mentioned blend into only one. There is really no difference because the colleagues, like the professors, the faculty, the researchers, they think the same thing. And even if they don't think so, there is no need for institutional pressure per se, because one of the conditions, and it's very sad what I'm going to say, it's very sad for me to say it, but it's the reality. One of the conditions nowadays to become an academic, to get, into a tenure track position or a tenure one in particular, the key condition is cowardice. You need, even if you think differently, you need to shut up. Academics nowadays, in every single human thing that can be controversial, they think first about the consequences of the study that they are doing before thinking about what is true and what is false. So all this has blended into something that not only makes university do not fulfill anymore the purpose that they are supposed to fulfill, but most importantly, they have turned universities into something, an institution that is harmful for society.
Some argue that controversy arises because certain claims about biology can be socially sensitive or politically weaponized. From your perspective, what responsibility do scientists have when communicating potentially sensitive findings?
In my view, the only duty of scientists is to seek truth. Everything else is not the problem of the researchers. The thing is that the academic system as it is now is not the best system, and it requires lots of things for the same people. It's like researchers, they are supposed to do research, to teach, to handle projects with millions of euros, to communicate, etc. And usually they are pretty bad at some of these tasks, because that's normal. I mean, if you're a researcher that is only focusing in the research, per definition, you're a little bit a dork, a nerd. So it's like, really, are we going to ask you to handle this, to communicate? Researchers are very bad communicators. And it's okay that it's like that. We don't need to ask them to communicate with what we need to ask them is to seek truth. And then there is the thing with general science, like popular science books on these kind of things. And I think that that's also something we need more. And the problem that we have is that scientists not only do not cooperate with people doing a popular science book, but they despise them. So the problem here that we have, I don't think that we should, push scientists to do this communication, etc. I do not believe that they have responsibility to that. I think that the only responsibility that they have is to seek truth, and then we need maybe to make them understand they need to communicate with other people, and those others are the ones who should properly communicate on things and let people understand, for example, that what do you use of something? We cannot do research considering what some political party is going to make of my research, because then you're not doing research, you're doing political party stuff.
You are strongly critical of some strands of gender studies. In your view, what is the best version of gender studies scholarship? Something you genuinely think contributes to our understanding?
Absolutely none. Zero. There is absolutely nothing in the... It's like, I understand that my response maybe can sound a little bit extreme to you, but you need to understand that in my ears, your question is, what benefits can have the flat earth departments in universities? None. Gender studies are flat earth departments. They promote flat earth, they are based in flat earth. It's the same thing, it's flat earthism, because they base everything that they do in the denial of biology. There is no way that they can do anything beneficial. It's like, imagine if, like, I don't know, we were building some new European spatial agency based on the earth being flat. What can I get? Okay, yes, a broken clock, that strikes the good hour twice per day. So maybe every 50 years they can get something right. But per se, it's wrong.
Some scholars say they don't deny biology. They focused on how culture amplifies or redirects biological tendencies. Where do you see areas of possible collaboration between biological sciences and social sciences.
Everything. I do believe that everything should be a collaboration. I do believe that we cannot say anything about the social world and about humans and their behavior if we don't base ourselves in biology, and if we don't collaborate with biologists and other people working on this. But the thing is that what you just mentioned at the beginning, like social scientists say, no, what we propose is a different understanding. That's the magic trick that they do, right? Because I have spoken about this in a book chapter that came also this year, earlier in May, that the title of that book chapter was University Against Darwin, right? And what I propose in that is like, okay, you're claiming that, good. We're going to make you pass a Darwin test. And Darwin test is very easy. It's just one question. What you're doing goes against the theory of evolution by natural selection of Charles Darwin? Let's say if you're not explaining, let me reframe. If you're just telling me in this city who voted for each candidate, that's perfectly fine. I mean, you don't need evolution to tell me that. You're just, checking things. You're a demograph or something. But if you want to explain why people have voted for this candidate or that other, that's a very different story. And in that case, you need to tell us if what you're doing, if the theoretical framework that you are using goes against evolution. And why this? Can physics go against mathematics? No. You cannot build any proper physical, theory if you assume that 2 + 2 = 10. Can biology go against physics? No. You cannot tell us anything about birds if you don't get right fluids mechanics. Can you tell us something about society if you deny biology? No. So this is the same thing.
How would you respond to the argument that expanded gender categories reflect people's lived realities, not an attempt to erase biology?
Gender is like an astrological sign. It's a belief that is not grounded in any reality, that is grounded only in a system of beliefs. If you adhere to astrology, you will believe in astrological signs. If you are into gender ideology, you will believe in gender. Gender, it's just a category that doesn't make any sense. What you have is sex, male and female, and within this category of these two, what you have is a broad set of behaviors. Some of them are more stereotypical or according to, the statistical tendencies, and others are individual variations. So it's like true Spanish psychologists always give the example of, between Arnold Schwarzenegger and Marilyn Monroe, there are a whole set of things in between, but it's not a whole set of things regarding sex. You're just going to have male and female that behave in different ways. So I do believe that that's the trick, because when you start getting, putting forward this gender concept, when you check I will say even literally nowadays, any official statement from the European Commission, from in the French Parliament, in the Argentinian Parliament, all law proposals, everything that is being done, it confuses the two.
Well, that brings us to the point. You argue that ignoring biological sex differences can lead to flawed policy. Can you give us some concrete examples where integrating biology would improve the outcomes?
First of all, integrating biology will prevent us in wasting taxpayer money in completely silly things. This, for example, toys. We have a chapter in the book on toys. And this thing that believe that if little girls play with this and if little boys play with that is because of society, that is entirely wrong. And the thing is that you have, for example, in France, every year the government pours into 2 and 7 million euros into this idea of non-gender or gender-neutral toys that, as we say in the book, is exactly the same thing as putting money into invisible paintings on silent music. So it doesn't make any sense. But then when you have on top of that, it's like, this is, something is like, okay, just preventing taxpayer money from being wasted. But then the thing is like, you cannot get any efficacy in the public policies that you are developing if you don't base everything in biology. You cannot fight domestic violence, you cannot fight rape, you cannot fight lots of things if you don't consider that. And also one of the key issues that we are having, and just to be clear, nobody has the answer to the problem that I'm going to mention, is the decline in fertility and natality everywhere in the world or in the developed world. But the thing is, like, also if you consider all the biological aspects of this, which kind of policy are you going to develop in this very key issue?
Many people worry that discussing sex differences reinforces stereotypes. How do you communicate your findings responsibly without feeding sort of a harmful narrative?
There is a quote that we use in our book that is biology, it's only destiny if you ignore it. Mm-hmm. So there are forces in us that operate, that make us do things, that make us have wishes and passions and all that, that if we don't understand them, they control us. The only way to ask for controlling these forces is to really understand where do they come from, what they want us to do, and why. And we have the scientific response to every one of the questions that I just mentioned. So there is no reinforcing stereotypes. What this knowledge does, it is free us, it liberates us. And if you want, this is also one of the key aspects of why I have co-written this book with Peggy Sast. We are both, at the end of the day, we are both philosophers. Our bachelor's and master's of both of us was in philosophy, and for her, her PhD was in philosophy. For me, it was political science. And, there is this Socratic idea of know yourself. So this is what the book is an invitation to do.
One theme in your book is that understanding our evolved psychology helps us navigate modern life, especially dating, jealousy, and relationships. What insight from evolutionary science that you think people could apply to their lives in a positive way?
Well, we have several chapters on that, and the thing is, like, just to make it very clear, the thing is, like, it can help you refine your strategies to achieve a goal. So if your goal, let's say, is to get into a relationship, like found a family, have children, let's say that is that, well, this is going to make you understand the choices that you do as a man, as a female, and that maybe is preventing you from going into that direction. Maybe your goal is not something so concrete as marriage and family. Maybe it's just being happy. But understanding this will make you understand what do you believe that is happiness, what actually happiness for lots of models in your mind is, and how this is going to evolve. And if this behavior that you're having now, let's say on your 20s, on your 30s, is going to maximize happiness over time, or is going to make you miserable in 5 or 10 years. So this knowledge is essential for that, because as you mentioned, we try to apply how things were to how things are, and for example, dating the apps and all that. And the idea is that our mind keeps doing the same things that were useful during 99% of our evolutionary history, but the environment has changed. It's like sugar, right? It was useful back in the days 300,000 years ago. It can be very harmful today. This is the same thing, for example, how we choose a mate, how we choose a girlfriend, a boyfriend, or a potential partner, and how we do this, for example, in dating apps. And it's kind of fascinating because what you have on dating apps, it creates some of the same very ancestral dynamics, right? I don't know if you want to dip into that, but it's explained in the book otherwise.
If you were to revisit this book in 10 years, what aspects do you think might evolve the most with new scientific evidence?
That's a fascinating question, because there is something that we say in the book, that when you check the scientific literature of 40, 50 years ago, the things published in the 70s and published in the 80s, is much more courageous, straightforward than the books on these topics being published literally today. So when you check the books today on these topics, it's like the researchers are apologizing for this research to exist. When you go to these books published 40, 50 years ago, the researchers really go to the ultimate consequences of this research. So to get back to your question, and over the last 40 or 50 years, what we got is a huge increase in the research. So there are so many more, not hundreds, but thousands of studies that confirm, this. So the thing is that we have reached a point, so there is nothing else that we need to prove all these things. There has been literally 1.5 centuries of research on this, since, if you don't want to say the origin of the species in 1859, let's say the descent of man in 1871. So 1.5 centuries of literally thousands of studies. And this is the trap that some of the researchers in this field are. They believe that, okay, if we have 200,000 studies, but we get to 200,001, then people are going to change their mind. No. So what is going to happen in 10 years from now? It depends on how courageous or how cowardly we are in defending this scientific truth now.
Finally, if someone hears biology matters and fears it leads to fatalism or hierarchy, what is the one message that you would leave them with?
I think that I will repeat myself. Biology, it's only destiny if you ignore it. And I think that there are biological realities that we need to acknowledge. There are things about all of us that we need to recognize. But at the same time, the idea with this is that this is an interplay between biology and between the environment, and the environment is changing in ways that we don't understand. For example, let's take men. What had helped men during all of our evolutionary history to advance in a status, hierarchy, etc., was physical strength. But that's not so useful anymore today. It's more brain power, So it has changed entirely. So the thing is, we do not know how the environment is going to evolve, and you do not know how you are going to be, in which place you are going to be into that environment. But in order to make the most and make the best out of that environment, you need to understand the forces at play inside you.
Orlando, thank you very much for coming in to talk to us today, and to your co-author as well for raising some very important questions. The book is available in French now. Any plans to publish it in English?
Hopefully, we are trying to see if we can get French and English and a Spanish translation as we talk. We're trying. Sorry, French. I said the Spanish and Hungarian translation on top of the English one. So we're trying to see that.
In the notes below, we'll include some links to where people can find your book. Thank you very much.
Thank you to you for the invitation.